Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom! Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio/RV dining room, located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks, to the interwebs. Once again, thanks again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Once again, your host of Operation GCD, JJ Vance, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, I will be your folks of the interwebs. I will be your pilot and navigator for tonight's shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And not gonna lie to you, folks of the interwebs, got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. The Anatomy of Satanic Panic, Volume 10, starring everyone's favorite, U.S. Army Psychological Warfare Operations Officer, Nazi Satanist, Muppet Mikey Aquino, where we've all been seemingly subjected to his psyops to mind war over these matters concerning the, satanic murders and satanic ritual abuse, notably amongst numerous children in daycare centers across America, not just Army daycare centers, as we've learned. And, it's these matters that of the psyops to mind war of Michael Aquino that we see repeated throughout all the propaganda. So we've been unpacking some of that in the different phases from the 1975 evangelical movement, and where these former satanic priests like Mike Warnke and John Todd would serve as the kind of controlled opposition factors through this evangelical movement. And turns out, especially with characters like John Todd, continued on being a dark occultist figure, and eventually would the numerous instances of child abuse, speaking of satanic ritual abuse around John Todd, would finally catch up with him in the late 80s. But, much like everyone's favorite controlled opposition propagandist here as well in these matters, old laser tag Ted Gunderson, John Todd really didn't lose a lot of credibility. But, however, that being said, concerning the telemarketing script here of old Muppet Mikey and gang that we see repeated throughout all the propagandists to our current era, in the psyops to mind war fashion, we've unpacked some of the tenets of his psyops to mind war. Michael Aquino, that is, right? And how they're going to use every form of technology and inundate folks with these messages. And despite there being evidence, continue to tell folks, these are not the Satanists you're looking for, right? There is no evidence. So, and we see these things continuing on through the matters such as QAnon and Pizzagate. And again, we see the same machinations and even the same folks, the same personnel involved in these matters moving forward. But it seems to be an issue where when we're unpacking these different phases, then we hit the 1980 phase, and that's really where the telemarketing script begins. The psyops to mind war Nazi Satanist propagandist telemarketing script. Michelle remembers, that psychiatrist that would, be the expert in the McMartin case, the McMartin preschool case there, which a lot of the Nazi Satanist propagandists want to say that's the first case. However, sometimes they slip up in those telemarketing scripts and they refer to that Kern County case. Again, this is one that doesn't fit the mold of their ongoing psyops to mind war telemarketing script, but it goes Michelle remembers, McMartin. Again, the Michelle remembers folks are the experts hired by Charles Manson's friend, Ira Reiner, who made a circus out of the McMartin case. And then they say in the telemarketing script, oh, you believe in the tunnels? Oh, you must be a moron. No. And then there's the Lanning report in 1992, which that begins the third phase. So the 80 to 92 is kind of that phase two of the propaganda machine of psyops to mind war. And then they learn their lessons and evolve in every aspect of the campaign. Both the Aquino side, he had the audacity to write a book in 97 claiming he had no evidence connecting him to the Presidio or any other such matters, and there was no evidence of any Satanists involved, and there was no children. Does the old Jedi mind trick tries to, Mr. Muppet Mikey Aquino, the Star Wars fan fiction writer. The same Star Wars fan fiction writer who would get it published in Forrest J. Ackerman's Monsters magazine. Forrest J. Ackerman, an OG member of the Agape Lodge of the OTO, Scientology original member, and as we found out recently from Anton LaVey's second wife's book, the authorized autobiography. I thought you had to write your own book for it to be an autobiography, but we found out from her that, you know, Forrest J. Ackerman was an original member of the Church of Satan. And I do make that delineation between his first wife and second, because the first wife, the co-founder of the Church of Satan, picked up with old laser tag Ted. You know Ted.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
They got Ted twice. Thankfully, there was other folks to carry on his efforts in these matters. And we do see those things, much like the Warnke and John Todd. We see John Todd and Fred Springmeier. You know, they have connecting activities. We see those things going on with Springmeier and Ted through the 90s in this phase 2. And then phase 3, we see other characters like Mark Passio, this other former Satanist priest, right, whose story doesn't check out just like the previous ones, but he's walking in the path forged by in those 70s phase 1 flap that no one likes to reference here in these Satanist propagandists, you know, in their telemarketing script. Well, they don't like to reference that because, you know, John Todd's a convicted child diddler, you know, amongst other things. Then you couldn't say there's no evidence, right? But that is the ongoing repeated pattern of behavior on top of the telemarketing script is there is no evidence. And we see that time after time. We've seen that repeated over and over again. We see it again going into the phase 2 flap of the Satanic Panic propaganda. I'm sorry, disregard phase 3. I got confused. Ted got shot twice, but this is the phase 3 flap. But we see that ongoing over and over again. And there's good reasons why they don't want to point to the 70s, besides the failures and lessons learned within that evangelical push initially. There's a lot, again, when you start mapping out these things chronologically, as we've been doing, and kind of layered approach of unpacking these things. Now we're going back over the unpacking the phase 3 portions in each individual phase here from essentially 1975, the initial onset of the Satanic Panic in Colorado there in July of 75, which coincided with the cattle mutilations. Same characters. That Warnke guy got himself involved in both. But as we're seeing these things and comparing them, and as I'm mapping out actual events of satanic murders and satanic ritual abuse, and again, it paints a very interesting picture when you see the evolution of their propaganda campaigns and this psyops to mind war and why they had to do these things, right? So, and there's not just the diddler John Todd that folks don't want to really point to, despite his old pal Fritz Springmeier, you know, the convicted domestic terrorist Nazi fella, Victor Schoof, a.k.a. Fritz Springmeier, and his bloodlines of the Illuminati business. He's been doing shows in recent years, still applauding the accolades there of his old buddy John Todd, despite John Todd spending the rest of his life in prison for that diddling back in 88. And again, he's, you know, when you start looking at those factors, then you start seeing the other actual events, not just that other case that they don't want to point to within the California network of satanic ritual abuse, that Kern County case that predates McMartin. And then they try to write that case off, these propagandists, that is, with all these psychiatrists just read that Michelle Remembers book, back to the telemarketing script. And as a result of that, they're like, oh, well, we just, that book impacted this Kern County case. Mind you, the Kern County case's dates of abuse predate the publication of Michelle Remembers. So that is these are not the Satanists you're looking for. Do not trust your own senses routines here that we're experiencing on to this day. And again, I like to use the propagandist and Aquino and gang's own words to decipher essentially against them. And time after time, a lot of these propagandists, as I've shown here thus far in the series, folks, and again, I thank y'all for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD on these dark matters of satanic ritual abuse and satanic murder and the ongoing propaganda campaigns to convince Americans there are no Satanist murdering folks, animals included, and there are no children being sexually ritually abused by Satanists, despite numerous, right now, again, speaking to the military installations, numerous Inspector General investigations from the Department of Defense are ongoing at numerous Army daycare centers across America right now. This is in 1987 with the Presidio and, the 7 or 8 other ones that they don't like to, folks to look at. They don't want you to look at that one. Again, it's the areas of obfuscation that are also very, very telling to me, but we do see the ongoing telemarketing scripts just repeated. And we see the same thing regarding the landing report. Just as we see Michelle remembers Martin's, oh, you believe in tunnels? You're a moron. And we see how that's shit coded with Ted too, how Ted laser tag Ted takes responsibility for a lot of those activities when he had nothing to do with it. And we see how the other Nazi Satanists, devout ones like Lucien Greaves and the Satanic Temple, MrProcess.org, Process Church logo tattoo, and his Process.org is dedicated to the Spychiatrist False Memory Syndrome Foundation. They were part of that phase 3 flap as well, where obviously they had to come up with a reason why all these kids are drawing pictures of ritual abuse, drawing ritual circumstances, robes, and different ritual occult symbols on those robes. So the solution there in phase 3 was, false memories. And that's who Lucien Greaves specialized in, and that's what he writes on his Process.org as far as attacking those victims. And again, that's another repeating pattern, is the attacking of the victims. But it is all very much seemingly a telemarketing script, and we see it repeated from the mouth of Michael Aquino, from the words of Michael Aquino and his Sives to Mind War, and then exhibited across the spectrum of these activities, well-financed podcasts, documentaries, so on and so forth. And they all say the same thing, and they all conclude there's no evidence, right?
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
In the trailer, it mentioned a book called Michelle Remembers. Can you tell us about that book, Michelle Remembers, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Victoria, so Michelle Remembers is by 2 authors from Victoria.
Which some Canadian psychiatrist said that his wife, under hypnosis, had recalled being mangled, by the Church of Satan when she was a kid. Well, we never had any Church of Satan in Canada.
Station at the preschool. The author of Michelle Remembers, co-author of Michelle Remembers, Lawrence Pazder, comes to speak to the parents about the crimes of satanic ritual abuse and what to look for and that type of thing. So you have all the makings of a moral panic, and then Ted Gunderson comes in too.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
The reason that it fizzled out as a fad, finally the FBI did a major study on the whole notion of satanic child abuse and just said this whole thing is a crock, and there's never been one verified instance of it anywhere.
I personally come from a really cynical, skeptical family. So there's a couple characters in the film that I think people can learn a lot from: the FBI agent, Ken Lanning, and the investigative journalist, Debbie Nathan. I think everyone needs some more skepticism in their lives. Ask people questions, ask why, right? And also take the time to think.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Martin, and you can see, because this comes into play later on, Ted Gunderson claimed to find tunnels underground in McMartin, but it seems if kids were talking about tunnels at McMartin, there were these colorful boxes that were built by one of the people who ran the McMartin preschool, and they would make these tunnels that the kids could go through. They would usually put them in this kind of horseshoe formation, and they could crawl about through the boxes. So those are the real tunnels of McMartin.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Watch out, folks. I got Ted twice. So we see that's the telemarketing script. We see again, as it goes into the phase 3, if you will, again, we see the evolution of these matters and the lessons learned, from everyone pointing to the Geraldo thing. Then we get introduced to Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey is an interesting character to bring in here, given her own cult connections, like the Sue Bud cult. A Sue Bud cult, where I often argue, as here on Operation GCD, in the game I like to play, who is your daddy and what does he do? Barack Obama's actual daddy there is biological. The founder of that same Islamic sex cult that Oprah Winfrey's got a lot of connections to. So, and again, she's rolled out. She's also infamously known for being the John of God sex cult, marketeer there, marketing all the sex cult stuff for that sex trafficking fell out of Brazil in recent years. So interesting character roll out on that. But again, we see these evolutions of these patterns of behavior. And again, Mark Passio is an interesting study in these, walking in not only the pathway that forged by Mike Warnke and John Todd, John Todd the diddler, John Todd, the aggressively disgusting. I mean, like, obviously on their face, diddling kids, obviously a pretty heinous crime and obviously pretty disgusting. And then you get people like John Todd who takes it to a new level. Convicted rapist seeks return of panties and pictures. This is a true story, folks. This is an actual headline from the life and times of John Todd. Yet we see his old buddy. That was back in '88. Again, they don't like to point to that whole phase one flap does not work well. Once Warnke and Todd got outed, Todd's a convicted diddler. He was still touring in the '80s, doing all this Satanist stuff, largely around the Dungeons and Dragons stuff. He's known for that. And again, even folks that point to the Dungeons and Dragons falsely in the propaganda campaigns today as the initial onset of the Satanic Panic, they don't like to mention John Todd. So I'm not saying Mark Passio is a diddler. I'm saying he walks in the same path where Todd and Warnke claim to be these former Satanist priests. Again, demonstrably and objectively speaking, I'm not implying anything I can't demonstrate here, folks, on the false narratives as purported by Mark Passio, but we see him touring with Fritz Springmeier, John Todd's buddy, at the same time in recent years where Fritz Springmeier is still promoting John Todd. He's maybe the only one. But Aquino has a connection to Austin, Texas. Oh, that is, yes, sir. That's interesting because we reviewed something a few weeks ago. It was something actually published by Bill Cooper in his Behold a Pale Horse book regarding a U.S. Army public investigation, U.S. Army CID investigation in regards to Michael Aquino and his Temple of Set in around the time of the Presidio affair in the late 80s. So, in that, two of his ranking folks in the Temple of Set were also military intelligence officers, one of which retired down there just north of Austin, there at Killeen, Texas, at what is that? Fort Hood, and was a ranking intelligence person within I think it's the 4th Battalion there, second Armored Division, whatever major Army unit was there. She was their G2, which is their ranking intel person within that operation. That's where she retired from. But in the 80s, she's noted as being a ranking member of the Temple of Set and one of Aquino's underlings. So there is a stronghold in places like Austin, Texas, I think, and Killeen. Because, I'm not implying that woman was murdered. She did die in a mysterious, one-car accident about 6-7 years ago. She's very well known in the community. And it's often, I often wonder, again, is it these matters of putting on the happy face, smiling face, saying I'm a good person in the community, but they're really doing some dark shit. And if it is, that's the example with her. Well, it's, par for the course because, Aquino never learned that lesson, did he? With them damn eyebrows. But we see these lessons learned. We see folks like Passio. We see, again, the connectivity amongst the other folks. And again, it shouldn't be ignored that folks like Tracy Twyman who carry on these torches with the QAnon matters, right? And the matters of Pizzagate, she's kind of at the forefront of those activities. And we see that again, not only in the propagandists are they telling us that this is Satanic Panic 2.0 with QAnon and Pizzagate, that we also see that fellow Aquino's boss and fellow author of Psyops to Mind War, Colonel Valet at the time, retired General Valet. He was actually pushing all of the QAnon and Pizzagate stuff. So we see the same operations continuing on through there and that evolution. And that's kind of phase 4. But they all tie in together, right? They all tie in because we see the same folks and the same patterns of behavior and the same anatomy of this Satanic Panic, right? As we're unpacking these things in different phases and then looking at perhaps why they don't want to point to those 70s, right? Why does everyone point back to Michelle Remembers, and even ones that don't, even they don't want to start at 1980, like this fella who decides that it all started with the Dungeons and Dragons situation, which again, that started with John Todd. And again, I'm not saying there might not be validity to some of those claims. It's not the point of what they're doing here, right? It is to take things that have valid claims. Again, pay no attention to the satanic ritual murders of humans or animals. Pay no attention to the satanic ritual abuse of children, right? In doing that, they got to dispel and make everything look ridiculous in regards to the actual events. That's why we see folks like Laser Tag Ted put a new cover sheet on that McMartin tunnel report, a tunnel report from the UCLA archaeologists who were hired by McMartin victims' parents in that preschool situation. One parent, Jackie McGauley, who old Laser Tag Ted infiltrated her life, lived at her house, seemingly mooched off her, according to her own claims. And she, her own words, said Ted kept on trying to insert himself into everything, including that tunnel situation, and she wouldn't have it. Now, we also see in the LA Times, Ted called a nice little publicity stunt, had the LA Times come out to McMartin the couple days prior to that archaeological team. And then he had some of the parents from McMartin come out there with shovels. And that's what we saw, Laser Tag Ted and the shovels, right? And then he later takes credit for all of that stuff on his website, as we've seen, has that report with his own. He put his own fucking resume on page 2 well before the report. That's what we're talking about with Laser Tag Ted here. But we see in those aspects of how these things get shit coded and dispelled, as far as, pay no attention, don't trust your senses. And then we see folks like Lucy in there. He can then point on Laser Tag Ted as being a total nut job, right? But it is those 70s things that we see Ted also, again, the connectivity of these different phases as we're unpacking them. We see Ted there, Laser Tag Ted, get involved in the Jeffrey McDonald case in the 1970s, right? So again, there's a lot of reasons why I don't want to point to the 70s stuff. McDonald is one of those reasons. And it's not just the McDonald cases. There are other cases like the Jeffrey McDonald case in the 1970s that they don't want to point to. That is the psyops to mind more propagandists, right? Just like we see numerous instances there with all these daycare centers, there is an epidemic seemingly with some Army activities of murder there in the 70s as well. And it's not just the McDonald case on Fort Bragg. It also includes a case up in Massachusetts at Fort Devers. Now, that's an interesting case because this is 1979. It says some elements of this case seem to be chilling echoes of the Jeffrey McDonald case, made famous in the book and film Fatal Vision. A military doctor and U.S. Army Captain McDonald was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife and 2 daughters, always maintained his innocence, still does today, as we've seen in some interviews. As in the McDonald case, the case against William Tyree, the suspect here, raises questions about whether the government and military suppressed evidence that could prove his innocence. Now, this is a very strikingly similar case. It says right here, Elaine Tyree, mother, wife, and U.S. Army soldier, had her life brutally ripped from her. Her husband, William Tyree, a special forces soldier, was convicted of this heinous murder, which he has always vehemently denied. This was January 30th, 1979, in Ayer, Massachusetts. So, again, no one wants to point to, even though Ted effectively shit-coded and buried the McDonald thing, right? He starts taking it over, completely shit-coats the matter, says, Satanism. I've never heard about Satanism. That's how Ted joined the whole scene in 1980, right? That was the whole, I'm just a good old goofy old Uncle Ted here. I don't know anything about Satanism. Why don't you guys tell me about it?
And I said to myself, what's this all about? I don't know anything about Satanism. I read about it in the Bible, of course, and that's about it.
And that's what he maintains. So as he's doing that, this case is popping off. So we see the evolution and need to cover these matters up because of the growing issues that are coming to the surface. And right around the corner from this incident, right at the same time, there's another satanic murders, not Army-based related, but satanic cult related. A lot of parallels to be drawn amongst all these other satanic cult murders at the time, going on simultaneously to this event in Fall River, Massachusetts. And again, this is another reason why pay no attention to that 75 flap in the phase 1. They got to repackage and repurpose their whole propaganda in 1980 with Michelle Remembers. And it's because of incidents like this.
In the late 1970s, the blue-collar town of Fall River, Mass. became the unlikely backdrop for a series of brutal murders. And these crimes, which would go on to be linked to a satanic cult, marked the beginning of the infamous Satanic Panic era in America. If you're unaware what that era is exactly, essentially, it was sort of a mass hysteria that slowly crept into the public consciousness. The reason why was a mix of factors. Movies like Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist, and The Omen becoming huge box office hits, heavy metal music becoming mainstream, and various articles and crimes coming forth, claiming that underneath the wonderful America we all know and love was a dark and sinister force at play. In Fall River, the horror all began on the night of October 13, 1979, with the murder of 17-year-old Doreen Levesque.
So, again, that's another new date right there in that propagandist campaign, but that's an issue and an incident where folks don't like to point to. And that's an area that's got a lot of satanic murders and ritual abuse in it, in that same region. So, again, we start mapping things out geographically speaking, temporally speaking, time-wise, paints a different picture. And again, that, in these eras where they start, these are all coming to the culmination there in the late 70s, a lot of these incidents, not the least of which things like the Son of Sam stuff, right? Where you have to evolve and come up with a new campaign in which to perpetrate your propaganda to say, pay no attention to those Satanists. These aren't the Satanists you're looking for. And again, we see that as an epicenter in phase 3, there in 92, with the Lanning report.
FBI agent Ken Lanning, who worked on hundreds of abuse cases through the Behavioral Science Unit, would release an investigative guide detailing his skepticism of satanic abuse in 1992.
No idea. And it's like not that far away.
If there's one, I guess, like takeaway you want people to have from watching this film, what is I'm thinking in the context of like we've talked about with QAnon and these kind of conspiracy theories. I mean, Trump's still talking about losing the election. People are really still are susceptible to this sort of thinking. So I guess I don't know. Is there any thing that we can do to convince people not to go down these kind of rabbit holes?
I personally come from a really cynical, skeptical family. So there's a couple characters in the film that I think people can learn a lot from: the FBI agent Ken Lanning and the investigative journalist Debbie Nathan. I think everyone needs some more skepticism in their lives. Ask people questions, ask why, right? And also take the time to think.
The reason that it fizzled out as a fad, finally the FBI did a major study on the whole notion of satanic child abuse and just said this whole thing is a crock, and there's never been one verified instance of it anywhere.
I mean, you heard it there, your folks yourself, and I'm sure our channel here would agree. There's never been any incidents ever, not one example, never. And I don't know that I ever said, again, your dedication to tomfoolery keeps me motivated. I don't know that I ever said Bill Colby was associated with satanic ritual abuse. I said, and I'll repeat it for you, that if you take the words of Michael Aquino, their old Muppet Mikey there, and his explanation of his operations in the Phoenix program, in working for Bill Colby directly, reporting to him directly at the U.S. Embassy in Saigon, his words, not mine. You take those same machinations of setting up these different cells of terror, domestic terror, internally to that country, and bringing it home regarding the weaponized folklore and the weaponized religion. Again, his words, not mine. And you apply that to what he did when he came home. Well, it's the same fucking thing. So I do appreciate your dedication there, RR. It well lost. You do seem motivated. It keeps me motivated, your dedication. Anyhow, Fort Hood, that's a strange correlation. But Fort Hood, again, is one of these epicenters. Fort Bragg, the base, is an epicenter, obviously. But we see, again, instances of these setting up these cells. Why do so many instances of Muppet Mikey there? Why do so many witness statements come up Mikey in all these satanic ritual abuse? And again, not just the Presidio. We looked at the Ukiah cases there shortly thereafter. And these are cases the U.S. Army CID report, Criminal Investigations Division, actually investigated, right? We looked at some of those activities. And again, it's not just Ukiah. We see nearby in Ukiah. So there's the Fort Bragg witch hunt. Again, why do so many instances come up at Mikey when you're talking about distances not that close together, right? You got the Kern County case way down here, which that has all the hallmarks of a cell established by the same methods in which Aquino's claiming he does to set up weaponized folklore and weaponized religion against the local populace. And that Kern case is the one that predates McMartin that no one likes to talk about, right? They're like, oh, well, It really all started with McMartin again, and the ones that talk about Kern, they try to, they debunk it by saying, oh, well, these psychiatrists read Michelle Remembers. We solved this dilemma. And again, the abuse in this case predates the publication of Michelle Remembers.
Some of the early allegations were in 1980 in Bakersfield, California, social workers had been reading the just published Michelle Remembers as part of their training when a number of children came forward to declare they had been molested as part of a clandestine local occult sex ring. 2 of the girls had been coached by a grandparent who was believed to have a history of mental illness. Over the coming months, their story of strange occult sex acts would grow more and more bizarre as they claimed to have been hung from hooks in their family's living room, forced to drink blood, and watch ritual baby sacrifices, and much more. The fact that these social workers were reading that now disproven story as part of their training, well, I really, really hope social workers aren't made to a study published in
So again, as far as taking McKeno's words in his own statements, again, why do so many things come up Muppet Mikey when he's doing the same thing? And again, that case in Kern that no one wants to reference has all the hallmarks of the same operations. The same operations where, again, he comes up and witness statements over and over again, like in Ukiah here. Ukiah, California, again, not far from Fort Bragg, California there. And again, not too far north of Presidio, but covering a great distance. I mean, we're talking, 200 plus miles, right? Comes up again. And then again, Ukiah, when you're talking Ukiah, you got to be talking Jonestown, because they basically owned and operated that town before they went to South America and did that whole thing, right? So we do see these machinations in the evolution of these matters. And again, much like the evolution and use as we saw with that Michelle Remembers, they discredit sexual ritual abuse, satanic ritual abuse of the children's and the daycares, right? In an instance that sounds very much like another cell set up by Aquino there, and not that too far from where he was living there at the time. Just saying, we see them discredit that by using that Michelle Remembers, despite the fact that the abuse in that case predates the publication of the book. We see the same thing that's phase 2, right? That's the phase 2 evolution. The phase 3 evolution, as we're going to be unpacking more tonight, again, starts with that landing report. And they use the landing report for the same reason. Oh, again, Michelle Remembers, McMartin, you believe in tunnels, you're a moron. And then it goes, landing report. Yeah, the FBI looked at it, dude. You clearly don't know what you're talking about. You're spreading satanic panic. The same thing Michael Aquino said to Dave McGowan, author of Program to Kill and Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, and so on and so forth. And the pedocracy that he was so butthurt about, saying to Dave McGowan back in August 2001 in his Muppet Mikey Psyops to Mind War, you're spreading satanic panic, sir. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. Again, he's claiming, again, word for word, verbatim, we see the same script, telemarketing style from these propagandists. And it evolved into the QAnon stuff, again, as we see the connectivities and the different phases into the phase 3 and 4 portions with the QAnon Pizzagate stuff. And again, we see that repeated over and over again by the same folks and involving the same connecting propagandists on the controlled opposition side. So these are the things we'll be exploring more here tonight, folks, of the interwebs, going into this landing report, phase 3, 1992 to we'll call it circa 2010, because really the machinations of all these QAnon and Pizzagate matters really start popping off shortly thereafter. Not necessarily the words in use, but the folks involved in what we know as those activities. And again, those activities where they continually to tell us things, and these same propagandists that we have doing the Satanic Panic media stuff today with the documentaries, the podcasts, well-financed ones, YouTube channels with million subscribers telling us there is no evidence, right? There is no evidence. But they're also telling us, those same folks are all telling us that Pizzagate and QAnon are Satanic Panic 2.0. And again, they're all telling us there is no evidence of these things. So they're all doing the same damn thing as Aquino. There are no Satanists murdering folks. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. There's no Satanists ritually abusing your children. Pay no attention to your senses.
The reason that it fizzled out as a fad, finally the FBI did a major study on the whole notion of satanic child abuse and just said this whole thing is a crock, and there's never been one verified instance of it anywhere.
Again, there is no evidence and there is no instances. And again, we hear that with the propagandists, again, repeating this elements of the QAnon Pizzagate stuff where there is no basement. Oh, you believe in McMartin? You believe in tunnels? You're a moron. Oh, you believe in Pizzagate and QAnon? You think there's a basement in Comet Pizza?
At first, it was simple harassment of employees and patrons of Comet Ping Pong. But then, on December 4th, 2016, a man named Edgar Welch showed up with an AR-15 and started shooting. He claimed he was there to, quote, self-investigate what was going on in the basement. He was there to save the children. Even after his arrest and conviction, Welch couldn't be convinced that it was all a baseless conspiracy. Even after he learned there wasn't even a basement at Comet Ping Pong. It was all made up. And this preceded the first Q drop by a year.
Well, that's wild, folks. There is no basement. Well, then that's strange. Why is James Alefantis, the owner and operator of Comet Pizza, saying here in this article from 2015, James Alefantis from scratch here in the DC Metro Weekly, and you just type in search bar here, basements. Alefantis is saying, yeah, we harvest all of our tomatoes, 10 tons every year, can them all, store them in the basement. I guess that's weird. Maybe these Nazi Satanist propagandists don't know how to read, or they're all intentionally propagandizing folks. And yes, there are no stickers on the poles. There are no poles in Moscow. And again, these matters plague Idaho, as we've also seen. Speaking of Moscow, Idaho, they plague Idaho. And again, we see the same things of pay no attention to your senses. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. There are no Satanists in Idaho. There are no stickers in Moscow. There are no poles in Moscow, because we see the same thing relative to satanic activity there in Idaho. Over and over again, a state where we see the satanic serial killer Thomas Eugene Creech, the man who survived his death penalty in recent years, who old Muppet Mikey speaks about in his own autobiography about the Church of Satan, because old Thomas Eugene Creech, LaVey and Aquino, well, apparently all knew each other there in San Francisco at the Church of Satan headquarters before he went on that whole, murdering spree there in Idaho. So, and again, but you think they learned their lesson. That's 1969, 1970 that's going on. Yet here we are just last year, and the propagandists in the mainstream media in Idaho and their news they're doing the same thing. There are no Satanists in Idaho. There are no Satanists murdering folks, ritually abusing children. These are not the Satanists you're looking for.
All right, well, Halloween and its connection to the unholy goes back almost as long as the holiday itself. After all, it began, Halloween that is, as a 9th century Gaelic festival, a pagan religious celebration. But it wasn't long before Halloween became inundated with ghosts and ghouls and demons, and pretty soon, pagan became something to do with Satan, which brings us to this. Idaho has a satanic law in its books. Well, it's more of an anti-satanic ritual law. But back in the fall of 1989, there was a baby girl found dead near the town of Rupert. The baby was found burned inside a metal box. Almost immediately, a rumor began to spread and became very popular. The little girl, unidentified and known as Baby X, was killed and mutilated as part of a ritual by a local satanic cult, the rumor said. Think black-robed figures sacrificing animals and children. It was the 80s, right? And the country was in the middle of the Satanic Panic. And soon, county prosecutors and local police got involved. So did psychologists and Christian groups, claiming demonic worship was all the rage in southern Idaho.
Sir, I would object. The folks there in the tiny town of Rupert, Idaho, and its county seemingly had some large-scale protests and gatherings in response to what they claim victims vouch for reality of satanic worship. That's that incident there in '89. So once again, we can see the evolutions there when we start seeing the activity picking up in the mainstream aspects of reporting and the general aspect of society. Suddenly that these are not the Satanists you're looking for. Routine by Aquino and gang is not working. They got to step up their operations. They got to change and evolve what they're doing, and we see that based upon the volume of activity. And once again, we see that again why these things are necessary, like the landing report in phase 3. And Why they're doing that today still, I have to imagine the folks there in Rupert, Idaho may not, I mean, they may not be too happy about it, or it may all be taken over by Satanists now. I don't know, because what is the result of all these things? What is the result of being propagandized to this level and none of these things being held accountable relative to the abuses, the murders, etc., right? And we're all told, even if you want to talk about these matters in, polite society, well, you're a QAnon Pizzagator, right? You're talking about all this stuff, and this is Satanic Panic 2.0. So a lot, again, this is and while this propaganda goes on and is perpetrated in the psyops of mind war, it is these matters that do affect our society at large. More victims are victimized, and there is, again, a result, not a positive one, folks, to all these activities, I would argue. So when we see these matters and these folks, these Satanist Nazi propagandists, if you will, they're going about their nonsense with these matters, like those filmmakers from that highly financed produced 2023 documentary, Satan Wants You.
Like it's these types of accusations, like when people are calling other people or accusing them of being pedophiles, it really it ruins your reputation and it can ruin your life. And Kelly Michaels definitely has felt that.
We should say, I mean, these cases are still being brought to justice, these false accusations. The film premiered at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, and there's a case literally right now that is unfolding for a man who has been, this is like 30 or 40 years of his life, and they're saying, no, this is not true now, right? Like, it's not just something.
So once again, the Nazi Satanist propagandists make my point for me, folks of the interwebs. They're saying, yes, thank you, Lucy Morningstar. That is a good name for a Muppet. But we see them saying these things, proving my point, and I'm not trying to, obviously, but they're saying, all these people are getting falsely accused. They're really the affected ones. They're the victims here. And again, we got folks like Lucy and Greaves carrying the torch. Mr. Process himself there, Satanic Temple, carrying the torch with blaming the victims. Again, that's a common thing. So not only do folks continue to be victimized, the ones that already have been victimized, well, it's their fault, according to these Nazi Satanist propagandists. And the ones that are being blamed for it, despite there being objective evidence, they're like, oh, there is no evidence. What are you talking about? Spreading satanic panic. And again, it doesn't matter the amount of evidence. We saw that with the Geraldo show, again, how they used the 87 Geraldo primetime show to discredit a lot of this legitimate evidence. Because how do you have so many instances of children across America who obviously don't know each other, not like these Nazi Satanist folk that they all know each other. These children are all drawing rituals, circumstances, candles, robes, symbols. They do it independently, but that's not evidence.
He has been studying this and other satanic cases. Why do you believe the satanic cult had something to do with this case of Lisa Steinberg?
Well, in the first instance, Geraldo, police removed demonology books from the Steinberg and Nussbaum apartment in New York. In the second place, I have seen writings done by Hedda Nussbaum, the adoptive mother of Lisa, if you will, in which she admitted that she was involved with a cult on Long Island that practiced rituals and conducted pornography and were involved in child pornography.
What's this?
Here is Hedda's diary.
This is her own diary?
Hedda's point book diary from 1983.
You can expect to be subpoenaed after this, sir.
Yes, and in it you can see here that Hedda was calling deprogrammers, cult deprogrammers, back in the fall of 1983 in order to try to get herself out of this group in Long Island that she had gotten involved with.
You have a sketch drawn by Lisa?
We found in the Steinberg apartment a sketch drawn by Lisa in her own hand.
Look at it, ladies.
Book. That's drawn by Lisa Steinberg with the...
Wait a second, folks. I thought there was no evidence. And again, we saw in that same Geraldo documentary, the Kansas City Butcher case there with the detectives and politicians all speaking to the nature and satanic activities of that serial killer. So, but we keep being told there's no evidence. So, and then again, as those things are boiling to the surface, we see the landing report, we see the additional faces, and we see the new characters rolled out, but they know the old characters. They all know the old characters. So, folks of the interwebs, I thank you again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. We'll be discussing more of these matters here on The Anatomy of Satanic Panic, Volume 10, discussing this Phase 3, unpacking that aspect of it, the Phase 3 of the PsyOps to Mind War, because there are real-world, actual satanic ritual murders and satanic ritual abuse, and there's an actual real-world propaganda campaign, well-organized and well-financed, of a psychological military intelligence operation style, right? Being waged against America to date. Folks like those two documentary filmmakers we just looked at, they may in fact be deceived, right? They are out there deceiving folks and doing so based upon what facts? Where are their facts in any of these things? Because, how do these people maintain these same telemarketing scripts across every medium and mechanism of technology and media, and they don't lose credibility? They don't lose credibility whatsoever. And, like old Laser Tag Ted never lost credibility.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
Watch out, folks of the interwebs. They got Laser Tag Ted twice. So on that note, folks of the interwebs, we'll see you over on the Patreon side. All the Patreon subscribers here, appreciate your support. Operation GCD Patreons. Find us over there at patreon.com/Operation GCD. And if you catch this broadcast in the future and you like looking at old Muppet Mikey and hearing about his tales and the psychological warfare waged against you, please tune in patreon.com/Operation GCD. And on that note, folks of the interwebs, I will catch Patreon folks over there. And again, please join us over there for more on these tales as we continue to unpack the propaganda and again start touching on some of those cases. Again, we can see why the need for Michelle Remembers pops off around these matters of the late 70s. Again, not only just the Son of Sam stuff, but obviously the ones that other folks don't want to talk about that have very, very similar patterns of activity, like that Fort Devers case of Special Forces fella, Tyree, relative to that McDonald case. And also, once again, the satanic ritual murder cult of Fall River, Massachusetts. Fall River, Massachusetts, where my old stalker / almost PR rep allegedly sits today. Old Buffalo Jared Revisa, mind-controlled assassin, multi-state murder spree. And on that note, folks of the interwebs, catch you next time. We'll see you over there on the Patreon side here shortly or momentarily.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GC. Yeah, the world's a puzzle, brunch rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines, Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.